Be reading from Revelation chapter 21, verse 14. Revelation chapter 21, verse 14. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away.
Good morning, church.
Good morning.
It's good to see everyone this morning. We've got a really good crowd live, and I think that we are still live on social media, so that's great. No hiccups yet this morning. At least I haven't been alerted of any. So I'm not gonna knock on wood. That's a little superstitious, but just continue to pray that goes well, because we want to make sure that we can reach as many as possible in this avenue. But it's great. I think the only technical difficulties that I'm having this morning is that I can't keep my shirt tucked in. You guys have done a really good job the 3 years that we have been here of introducing us to new hole-in-the-wall places to eat. And I went yesterday with the Cremines to a place down in Leopold, and it was about a 9-inch wide breaded tenderloin, and I think I ate it in about 7 minutes. So it's showing on me this morning. But it was very good. I'd recommend, I can't remember the name. Marcy's Leopold Restaurant. It was really good. If you're able to make your way down there. It was awesome. But I wanted to start on a little bit of a high note, because I know this morning, whenever you look at the topic of this morning, we're talking about suffering. Here we go. This might be a somber lesson this morning. I hope that you don't take it that way. But I do want to talk about kind of a serious topic this morning, or a serious subject. Something that is more dangerous and more serious, because this idea of suffering inside is an internal struggle. And oftentimes with internal struggles, other people around us may not be aware of what's going on in our lives. Statistically speaking, I don't have a statistic, but statistically speaking, I would dare say that there are plenty of people, even sitting here in this audience this morning, that are suffering in some way on the inside. And maybe that suffering has gotten you to a point to where you might be at a breaking point of some sort. And so if that is the case, while this lesson is for everyone, this lesson is for you as well. And so I hope that it benefits all of us. But I do want to ask that question. How do you know? How do you know normally when someone is suffering? When someone is suffering with something, anything going on in their life. Oftentimes it is because of an outward expression, isn't it? It's because on the outside they're showing signs of sadness. They're showing signs of depression. They're wanting to be more lonely in a sense, or they're kind of forcing themselves to be more lonely. Maybe they're showing a sense of excessive anger that is completely out of their character. And so we look at characteristics like that, and we know something's wrong, right? We can usually tell something is wrong with an individual. But what about when they hold? What about when they hide all of their emotions in? What if by every aspect, what if by every instance that you ask a person, or when someone asks you if you're okay, you say, yeah, I'm fine, and you put a fake smile on your face, and you're a really good actor, and you convince other people that everything is going really great in your life. You know, a lot of us say we could never go to Hollywood. We could never act in a movie or a film like that. But some of us are the best actors in the world at hiding what we're going through. Some of us are the best actors in the world in wanting to make sure that no one else feels burdened with our problems and the things that we are going through. I'm going to say it right now, and I'm going to say at the very end, stop it. Stop doing that. You're only hurting yourself more. You're only creating a more dangerous situation for yourself. Take advantage of the fact that you have a Christian family that might, as individuals, be going through some of the same things that you are, and can sympathize and empathize with you. So don't hide those things in. But I do want this lesson this morning to encourage us to listen and watch. If we're the person on the outside, if we're the person who can be vigilant of others, I want to encourage you to listen and watch for the hurt that might be in other people. I also want this lesson to encourage you that if you are someone that is hurting, don't be afraid to cry out. Don't be afraid to cry out with your pain. And I hope that this lesson will also help us to seek comfort. Seek comfort in the right places. There are a lot of different ways that you can seek solace and comfort in the times that we hurt and the things that we're going through in life. But I'm going to tell you, a majority of those things are just very, very temporary. And a lot of those things can make the problem even worse. Things like drugs and alcohol. Whenever we get into those things to kind of bring us to a calm or to forget the things that we're going through. Obviously, those are not the correct solutions. So this morning, I hope and I pray that whenever we are honest with our hurt, whenever we are honest with the suffering that we may go through, that we'll seek the right avenues of where to go. But I want to talk about some ways in which we may be suffering on the inside. The first thing is this, is that we suffer when others hurt us. We suffer inside when others hurt us. You know, sometimes we feel more and more downtrodden. Sometimes we feel more and more down in the dumps. Sometimes we get more and more depressed whenever we see our enemies, the ones who have hurt us in the past, the ones who have brought conflict in our lives, the ones that really have put us down or brought us down. We are brought down even lower whenever we see our enemies rising. Whenever we see all these things happening to them, and it seems like they're getting all the blessings and we're not, and it's just not fair. It's just not fair when that's happening. And you know, David saw some of that, and he wrote about it in some of his Psalms. You know, here he was a man after God's own heart, and God was with him. And yes, God was with him most of the time, God was with him all of the time, but David couldn't always see it. Because it didn't mean that David's life was perfect. It didn't mean that bad things didn't happen to David. It didn't mean that David sometimes had to face his enemies, and sometimes he didn't always get the victory. And when that happened, he would even ask, you know, where are you, God? But here's some questions that he asked, or here is a question that he asked at least. In Psalm 13, verses 2 through 3, how long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider, Lord, and answer me. O Lord my God, light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. I don't want to read too much into this statement, so I want to be very careful with that. But something that I do want to consider, and something that I want you to understand, is that even biblical characters, even characters like David, who could stand with God, who could speak with God, even they got depressed. And even they were brought low and had times in their lives where they wondered if they even could live anymore. Whether they could face life any longer. Again, see what he says at the very end. He says, light up my light, or light up my eyes, Lord. Cheer me up. Cheer me up, lest I sleep the sleep of death. David at times faced some very, very sad situations. David at times felt lonely. David at times felt like God wasn't on his side. Whether he felt like he deserved that or not, I don't know. But notice how in this passage, David talks about how he bottles things up. He's bottling things up inside. And he has nowhere to go. He has no one to talk to but God. He says, God, I'm tired of seeking counsel within myself. I need you. I need you, and I need your help. So David held a lot of hurt in. But here's the good thing that he did. While he was holding those things inside, most definitely, who did he eventually share it with? Well, we know he shared it with God. He's speaking to God right here. He says, Lord, this is what I'm going through. I've held it in enough. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it on my own. I can't live life like this. So, here's what we need to understand. But when we share our sorrows, He lifts us up. God lifts us up. Look at Psalm 147 and verse 3. Psalm 147 and verse 3 says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Now, here's something I want us to understand. The psalmist here is not talking about putting Band-Aids on physical wounds that one has been given. This is totally and completely a mental or an emotional situation that's being referenced here too, because he's talking about the broken heart. God heals the brokenhearted. He binds up their wounds. How powerful of a statement is that? And I know that it's hard sometimes for us to have the patience that we need to have with God. We know that God does things in His own time. And to God, those times are the right times. So sometimes we do need to be patient there. But it is just as important and just as right to share our sorrows with God as it is with other people. And we need to share those sorrows with Him. Paul reminds us in Romans 8 and verse 18 that the current sufferings don't compare to the glory that is coming. Now, I understand that whenever we look at context in a passage like this, where Paul's talking to the Romans, he's primarily talking about persecution. But isn't persecution and isn't the way that other people treat us, isn't that also a situation where we can become very depressed and downtrodden and we can feel worthless at times? Absolutely. Folks, I feel completely different when I'm in an environment like I'm in right now, with people who love God and are dedicated to God and want to live their life fully and solely for God. I feel completely different in a situation like this than when I do when I'm in an environment where nobody cares. Nobody cares about God. Nobody wants to hear about God. Nobody wants to live for God. I think we're all in that environment from time to time, aren't we? And when we're the one that sticks out like a sore thumb, oftentimes we can become a target. And when we become a target like that, then we are put down. And sometimes that putting down becomes overwhelming. But Paul wants to remind his readers, listen, any type of suffering, anything that we might go through on this earth is in no comparison to the glory that is coming from God to you. And folks, I don't know what else could be more comforting if we truly and wholeheartedly have faith that God has something waiting for us at the end of our life. So comforting to know. When you go to James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, James here helps us understand that getting through each trial makes us stronger. Isn't that even more comforting to know? You know, and I kind of look at it like this. I know that there's some of you that are here this morning that you work in the mental health field, and you see people suffer. You see people on their last thread. You see people that are wanting to give up. But I want to tell you as a child of God, I want to tell you as a Christian, I want you to understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I believe James is saying as much here. And he's saying that with each trial that we go through, with each challenge that we have, with each amount of suffering that we get through and we come out on the other side, we are stronger on the other side because of it. Now, I know that every single person in this room probably can give a story or an account in your life where this has certainly rang true. I know that I can. You know, people look at me. People look at me because I'm a preacher and I can get up here and I can speak with a smile on my face, and you automatically conclude, well, you know, he's got everything together. He's got all his ducks in a row. Okay? Two people that know for sure that I don't is Dennis and Dan. You know, they know that I don't have all my ducks in a row. They know that I'm not perfect. They know some of the things that I struggle with, that I don't get right sometimes, and all of that. And then there are many of you in this audience too that know I'm not a perfect person. That you know some of the trials that I've been through in my life, and I know some of yours as well. The thing is that even though we go through those trials, if we're determined and we understand that there's light at the end of the tunnel, we are going to be stronger when we come out on the other end. So think about that and take hope in that. That there's always life on the other side. There's always light at the end of the tunnel. We suffer inside when others hurt us. But through all those trials, we can be stronger on the other side. We also suffer inside when we hide our grief. I want to talk briefly about grief this morning. I know that I've preached on it before. I don't think we all realize how much that we as individuals hide our grief. Maybe it's because you feel like, well, you know, after about a month, nobody else wants to hear about, you know, my feelings about my loss. Nobody wants to hear about that anymore. And, you know, they came to the funeral and they did all these things for me. Maybe you're on the other end of that, and maybe you're just like, maybe you feel alone. Maybe you're not getting enough attention. But the point is, maybe you don't think people want to hear about it again. But you're still grieving. You still have that pain. And that pain hasn't gone anywhere. The pain is still there. Grief can be a very powerful thing. But it's something that we need. We need help with. We need to go on that journey. and once again see the light at the end of the tunnel. But more often than not, loss can make us feel empty and lonely. Well, both of those, I'm sure, go quite together, don't they? Emptiness and loneliness is a sure sign of the grief that we go through when we have lost someone that we care about, when we've lost someone that we love, whether it is a friend, a spouse, or a relative. All of those things. We connect with people on deep levels, people that we love. And when we lose that individual, we are lonely, we are empty. And that's a fact. And it's a fact that we can try our best to hide, but ultimately we can't. Because after that person is gone, our life changes. Our life is different. And making that adjustment is one of the worst things for a person to have to go through. I want to talk for a minute about David's loss. Now, whenever we think about King David and his grieving moments, what's the first story that we always go to? Well, the story of David and Bathsheba, and because of David's sin with Bathsheba, the son that Bathsheba bore with him died. Basically died soon after childbirth. And we think, that was David's that was his most agonizing moment. I don't believe that's true. David prayed and prayed and prayed and fasted and agonized when that child was sick, saying, Lord, this was my fault. Kill me instead. But as soon as that child died, he got up, he washed himself, he went to the temple and prayed. Now, the most agonizing moment was in the future. Nathan told David, because of this sin with Bathsheba, it's not that you're just going to lose this firstborn son with Bathsheba. You are going to have turmoil and problems in your household from now on. You know what one of those problems was? His son Absalom. His son Absalom, as he grew into a man, said, you know what? I want my father's throne. And I want it now. And Absalom even rose up an army against David and his army. He was willing to fight his own father. He was willing to put his men up against David's men and have all of those men die over a family squabble and over power. But did David still love Absalom? He was his son. He absolutely loved him. And Absalom died one of the most humiliating deaths ever. As Absalom was riding along, he was a very handsome man and he had long hair. As he was riding along, his hair got caught in a tree, pulled him off the horse, and he was hanging from the tree by his hair. And then David's head military leader Joab saw him in that vulnerable position, and he came up to him and he stabbed him to death whenever he was defenseless and he couldn't fight back. Well, after every battle and after every interaction, David always wanted a report. How is my son? Have you captured him? And you know what Israel was doing? They were celebrating. They were excited. Absalom has been killed. Absalom has been defeated. Yet they had to break the news to David. Your son's dead. He didn't want his son to be killed. He wanted him to be captured. That was his specific instructions. 2 Samuel 18 and verse 33 tells us how David reacted. And by the way, this is a song that it's a choral arrangement, and it's called David's Lamentation. And I sent this song performed by a choir in your emails that I send out. And I encourage you to listen to it. This arrangement of a song, I heard it Fried Hardeman by the FHU Chorale one time. If you want to understand what it's like through a song to experience loss, this song captures it very well. You know what? Whenever we experience loss, there's pain and there's sadness, isn't there? Whenever we see somebody else experience a loss, it's a little bit awkward. Whenever you walk up to someone who's just lost someone they love dearly and they're crying in agony, and it's a cry you've never heard from their mouth before, and you don't know what to do. You're like, what do I do here? This is awkward. This is weird. Songs have an innate ability to bring about all kinds of emotions. Whenever you listen to this song later, if you haven't yet, there are parts of this song that are on purpose or purposely out of tune, okay? That are purposely loud and shrilly, and then there are parts that are just calm and somber. It expresses all the emotions that take place in 2 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 33. And the king, when he heard that Absalom was killed, the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "O Absalom, my son, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son, my son." This was one of the worst times in David's life. This is one of the worst things that David had ever gone through. He'd lost a son whom he loved over a family squabble. That's grief. And grief can be horrifying sometimes. Grief can be horrifying from the prospect or the view of the person that is grieving. And it can be horrifying from the viewpoint of those who are trying to console someone who's grieving. But nonetheless, a grieving person needs to grieve. And a grieving person needs people around them. They need people to love them. And it's okay to grieve. But here's what I want us to understand. Whenever we do grieve, please tell somebody. Please talk to someone. Please don't be afraid to do that. And here's what I want us to understand. But when we suffer inside, we hide our grief a lot. But those who mourn will be comforted. Matthew 5 and verse 4. Jesus tells his audience that on the Sermon on the Mount. You will be comforted. First of all, what I want us to understand is that when someone that we love, whenever we're grieving for someone whom we love, when they are Christians, whenever they are faithful Christians, they are children of God, there's hope. There's hope for eternity. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do in the same..." You may not grieve as others do. You can translate that as, you may not grieve in the same way as those who have no hope. This passage, whenever you read this carefully, I don't think this is saying, don't grieve at all. Don't miss that person at all. Don't have any pain over their loss or over their death. That's not what this is saying. It's saying that a Christian has the ability to grieve in a different way, right? We can miss the person and we can be sad that they are no longer with us physically, but we can do so with hope, knowing, hey, you know what? I am going to see them again. I know that they are no longer suffering. I know that they are with God. That's the wonderful power and the mystery of the fact of someone we love who's a child of God who passes on. We can have hope in that. But I know that that's not true for all of us. I know that we have friends, we have family, we have relatives that are not in Christ. That they do pass away. We do lose them. And that creates even some harder grief at times. Sometimes that's hard to get through. In that case, I know that we have to just do what we can to live for God. And know that we want to go to heaven and we just trust God in everything. But for those of us who deal with others who might grieve, I want us to take the beginning example of Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Now, as you get deeper into the book of Job, you start to say, I wish they wouldn't have opened up their mouth. Because they begin to condemn Job. They begin to say, well, all these bad things must have happened to you, Job. You must have lost all your kids. You must have lost all your land, your property, your slaves. You must have lost all of those things because you did something horribly wrong. Because you went against God. And he was like, I have looked, I have questioned, I have examined my life, and I haven't. But you know what those three friends did for the first 7 days that Job was sitting in an ash heap, grieving everything that he had lost? They came along and they saw him, and they sat in the ashes with him and even tore their clothes to show that they were grieving with him. Now that is something powerful right there. And that's the part I think we need to think about as far as helping others. It says in Job 2:12-13, and when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him. For they saw that his suffering was very great. They knew at that moment, he's suffering. He just needs us here. He doesn't need us to say anything. He just needs us. He just needs us here. And that can be the best thing that we can do for others at times. Whenever they are suffering, whenever they are grieving. Just sit with them. Let them begin to communicate and talk when they're ready. That's so important. But those who mourn can be comforted, and we can be a part of that comfort if we just do it in the right way. We can suffer inside also, though, when we don't know our value. And I want to be as quick with this as I can, but I still want it to be impactful as well. Most people that we might see as really valuable, and as I said a while ago, have it all together, most of those people probably don't know how valuable they are. I want to give 2 examples here in just a moment. I know everybody knows the first one. Everybody in this room knows who Robin Williams was. One of the greatest comedians of all time. He knew how to make you laugh and then grab at your heartstrings at the same time. He had some of the most well done and emotional roles in Hollywood that I've ever seen. And he never was properly rewarded for that, mind you. He was the most hilarious and outwardly one of the most joyous men that has ever existed. And I don't want to necessarily put him on a pedestal. But what was going on inside of him? He felt so low about himself. He never felt like he was good enough. He didn't think he was funny. He masked his own suffering by humoring others, and eventually took his own life because he was suffering inside. The second one is Anthony Bourdain, and he is well known for having a hit show, No Reservations, where he traveled all around the world and he would get to know different cultures and customs around the world, and even tried their food. I watched one the other day where he was, they were preparing pig in this other place, and he tried. It wasn't like a brain sandwich at the Fall Festival. He tried pig brains. I wouldn't do that, especially if it's raw. That's gross. All right? But he was willing to immerse himself in these cultures and get to know everybody. And he was well known. He was a food judge on the Food Network. He was a connoisseur and a great chef. And everybody loved him. And he seemed to be on top of the world and seemed to have this extravagant life. But he too was lonely, downtrodden. You talk to any of his relatives, they would have never known that he was suffering the way he did. He also took his own life because of his inner suffering. Because these two men did not know how much they were valued by their family, by their fans, by the world in a sense. But most importantly, they didn't know how much they were valued by God. Some people in this room may not know how much you are valued by God. But I want you to know this. But God numbers the very hairs on your head. God knows everything about you. God knows everything about your coming into the world. God orchestrated the whole thing. God created every bit of your being. But Matthew 10, verses 30 and 31 says, "But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows." Jesus wanted his disciples there to know their value. The fact that God knew exactly who they were. And God knows exactly who you are. Mind you, God even knows the things that you are struggling with, the things you are suffering with. And He wants to be there for you. But I think one of my go-to passages in this is Psalm 139 and verse 14. David there proclaims that not just he, but we are fearfully and wonderfully made. God knows our inner being, our physical inner being. God knew about organs that were in our body before man knew about those different organs, about how everything worked. God set up that system. He knows you, and He values you for the simple fact that you are a human being. You are made in His image. Genesis 1, 26 and 27. You are His creation. You have value, even when you think that you don't. I want to close just with this thought. If you're here this morning and you're suffering, if you're online this morning and you're suffering, don't suffer alone. Don't do it alone. You don't have to. Therefore, you shouldn't. Romans 12 and verse 15 talks about us being a family who rejoices with those who rejoice, but also weeps with those who weeps. And we are a Christian family that wants to do both of those with each other. Let us listen and weep with you if you are in fact struggling and suffering on the inside. I want to read Revelation 21 and verse 4, which was our passage, our scripture reading at the beginning. I understand, again, when you look at context, this is talking about, overcoming the world and the fact that there is hope for those who suffer for the sake of Christ. Sometimes suffering for the sake of Christ means maintaining your faith as you get through daily individual trials in your life. But there is hope. Revelation 21 and verse 4 says, He, meaning God, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away. I can't wait to go to heaven. I can't wait to have a moment in my life, spiritually, and death is no more. But there is only eternity in heaven with Jesus Christ. We can all have that if we become a child of God. If we repent of our sins, if we change our heart and change our life, and then confess His name and are baptized into Christ, we are a new creation. And we have that opportunity. We have a mansion being prepared for us. You can become a child of God this morning. The water's ready behind you. But if you're here this morning and you are a Christian that is just suffering as a Christian, and you feel like David at times where you just haven't heard an answer, or you don't know where God is, please start by allowing your Christian family, your church family, to gather around you, to pray with you, and to show you that we love and care for you. And we can help show you that God is right there. So if you need to come this morning for either reason, please come as we together stand and as we sing.
Jesus the loving